Welcome to Relaxing Watercolor. All of the tools, plus the stock photo that's inspiring me, are listed in the description below. You can also navigate through this video via the timestamps also listed in the description. I'm going to start out first with cerulean blue, and I'm mixing up my sky color. For this mix, I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue, and this just cools off the color just a little bit. Having a swatch card handy and checking out your colors before you apply them to the composition is always a great idea. So here I've got the mixture that I'm looking for, and let's start in on the shape. For this, I'm creating a water shape first, and then I'll drop my color in later. And while I've started out with that small little brush, I quickly realized that I needed my larger brush to complete this. So here I'm using it to fill in the rest of the sky. And we'll go to the other composition and use this big brush to establish that big mountain shape, knowing full well that I can adjust things later if I need to. Now let's start dropping in some color. So what I want to do is just grab a little on my brush and build the color naturally. And this may take a little bit of adjusting. It looks as though I have too much water. This is a common mistake, and I'm a beginner watercolorist as well, so we're learning together as we go. But I know I can lift, so I'm not too worried. What I'm going to do is add some of that blue-gray mix to my sky mix and create this kind of gray, cloudy color for the bottom of the sky, closer to the horizon. And now let's start adjusting this and lifting some. I've put down too much color and too much water. I'd also like to amend the color and make it darker at the top. So for this, I am using a lot more color on my brush and less water. I'm also focusing on just dabbing my brush instead of brushing. I find that this drops the color a little bit better. And now let's establish that bigger shape, that shadow shape on the mountain. And to do this, I'm using my big brush. I'm using that blue-gray, and let's just go for it. I start out by just establishing the outline between the light and the dark. It's trickier on this smaller composition where I have much less space to work in. But this is a really great practice for brush control, so I'm going to keep with my big brush and see what happens. Alright, so I'm lifting here to get rid of some of that shape and also to kind of soften things out a little. And now it's the fun part. Now that we've gotten all the scary stuff out of the way, we can have fun and just put in some smaller shapes. And what's great is I'm not copying the photo exactly. I'm using the photo as inspiration. But I've found that when I look at a stock photo that I'm trying to learn from, and I see all of these very small, crazy amount of detail, sometimes I get overwhelmed. And to fix that, I start with my big shapes, I lay them down, and then I break them up into smaller shapes. This makes things much more manageable and less daunting and intimidating. And so you can see here I am using all angles of this brush and really playing with mark making. I'm turning it on its side and doing little dabs and strokes to make thinner lines. And I'm also sort of swiveling it and turning it in different ways to create different types of shapes. By letting the paint slowly drain out of my brush, I allow the color to become lighter as I go without having to do any work on my own. So here I am now focusing on the lighter areas of the snow because this lighter color is perfect for those little tiny shadows that aren't super dark. And this is a lot of fun, so just remember when you're looking at a stock photo and when you're looking at my painting and going along with it, that you can do your own thing. That we're not carbon copies of each other. And if you wanted a photo, you would just take a photo. So just relax into the paint and let it flow and have some fun, and don't worry about if it comes out perfect. Alright, so now I'm going back to the smaller detail brush. And the reason why is mainly that at this point now I have much smaller shapes that I'm working with. I've established all my large shapes, and you see I've knocked them out pretty fast with that big brush. But now all these little details will be much more enjoyable and fun to put down with this smaller brush. You can use any size brushes and any brand brushes that you like, but I do encourage you to at least work with a very large brush at some point in your life. It really does change the way that you appreciate your smaller, finer detail brushes. So here I'm just playing with shape. I'm looking at the photo and then I look at the composition, and what's great about having two compositions of the same drawing is that I can really play with how the shape of the composition affects the overall flow of the piece. And one is taller and skinnier and one is almost square. So it really does allow me to explore how shapes play with each other within these two different rectangles. Now I'm adding a little bit more of that sky color into my snow. And while snow has a lot of gray, it also has a lot of color of whatever the sky color is. So if you notice at sunset, the snow is pink and orange. And in the daytime, it has a lot of blue in it. And that's because snow is super reflective. If you've ever been out in a snowstorm, you'll know it is blindingly bright and all that light is bouncing around. So I'm going to grab some neutral brown mix here. And that's for the little rocks that are peeking out of the snow in the mountain. And here I'm just sort of looking at the photo, but then kind of going also with my previous brush strokes. So you see there's all these marks that I've already made, so I'm sort of accentuating them and bringing it out. So at this point here, look at the photo. See how the structure of the rocks is made? And then use that in your own work and construct your own mountain. Now I'm going into my blue-gray mix, and let's start defining more shadows in those new shapes that I've put down. I build up the shadows as I go. And let's create some detail where the snow is peeking through. Now looking at the stock photo, I notice that there's a lot of randomness. So to recreate that randomness, I'm just throwing down some spatter and seeing what happens. But of course it goes farther than just the mountains, so let's lift it up. And by lifting up the spatter that I don't want, I'm Now creating sort of a grid where I can then use the spatter and sort of connect the dots. You can also leave some random spatter if it really works to your advantage. This is a fun technique if you get kind of frustrated and not really, oh, we've got a little spot there. Let's take that up really quick. It's a really great technique if you just want to add some randomness to your mark making. But over here on this smaller canvas, I don't even know if I'm going to get into the level of detail as the other one. So I will go with just adding more straight strokes. And you can see once I've already established the direction of the way the rocks go, I tend to stick with that direction. Alright, these little tiny shapes over in the little composition are very, very light, but I think it will add a lot to the overall piece when you're done. Now, some of the shapes tend to be a little harsh, so I'm just softening up those edges. And you can see that the light is coming from the top left. So now I'm dipping into a neutral brown mix again. Let's just bring out a little bit more neutral color and break up some of this blue. But now in contrast, let's add a whole lot more blue to these shadows. Looking at the stock photo, my shadows look much too light. So I'm going to darken them up, but I want to add some color as I do it. Let's grab this big mama brush and a lot of gray and really go for it. By dabbing and creating strokes, I'm adding texture as I do this. But by not dragging the brush and using a very light touch, I'm also not pulling up too much of what's underneath, just softening it slightly. Now let's do the same to the other side, but this one is so much smaller, so it's a lot faster to finish. So you can see I'm using the angle to really get smaller bits in there. Alright, back to my smaller brush. And for these mixing recipes and all the colors that I'm using, you can go ahead and check the description below. I actually show you how to mix these neutrals at the end of the video. Alright, so now let's go into the deep, dark crevices of this mountain. And I love creating lots of contrast in my paintings, so I may be exaggerating the contrast here. But you'll see that in the end, I think it'll all come together. And I'm using small little strokes, dabs, and lines that are parallel to each other to create this snowy, rocky mountain texture. Alright, so after about an hour of letting it dry, this is kind of set into the paper now, and I can do some additional layering without worrying too much about pulling up all of what's underneath. And so for this next step, let's mix some of our blue-gray and our neutral brown to create a very true neutral gray mix. And it's a really dark mix as well, which is great for the shadows. So I'm going to start out with the darkest mix in the dark shadows. But let's lighten up our brush a little now and start working into some of the lighter shadow areas. Once I've put down a line, I like to put a lot of parallel lines around it. This helps the rock structure. So these lines are parallel to lines that I've already put down elsewhere. And by lifting up my brush at random points and dabbing here and there, you create an element of randomness, which is very, very common in nature. Alright, so now I'm looking at the photo, and what's really missing is the trees in the small little composition. So I'm mixing my neutral brown with a little bit of burnt umber to make a warmer brown. And now looking at the stock photo, let's just start by establishing the main branch. You can see here I'm just dabbing and putting little wiggly lines. Things do not have to be perfect. As long as you're enjoying it, that's really the main key here. And you can see I'm just sort of doodling away, enjoying the texture, not really sticking anywhere near close to the stock photo at this point, and just letting my brush wander around the paper. But I do want to create the feeling of distance that the stock photo has. So I think let's create a smaller little shrub in the distance. And this will help us create perspective, because the shapes that are larger and darker, like the one that I'm working on right now, that's closer to us, looks closer because the shape is larger and darker. And that little shrub that I put down earlier that's farther away is smaller, placed farther down in the composition, and it's a lighter color. And this creates the feeling of distance. Alright, so I'm creating a nice little neutral gray. It's got a little blue to it, but here we're making some pine trees in the far, far distance. And the ones that are closest to us will have some detail. And they are the darkest ones, so I put them in first. But as my brush starts draining of paint, I'm putting in the ones farther in the distance, and this just comprises of a small little sort of dot, I guess. I start with a light touch at the top and then push down a little at the bottom, and this creates a small little triangular cone. Grabbing that neutral gray mix, let's work in some more detail now. And maybe a little blue-gray as well. Adding some small detail to the key areas of the composition will draw your eye and hold it there, which is what you want to do. You want to keep your viewer interested in your artwork. But it's a fine line between too much detail and just the right amount. I struggle with this all the time, and I'm not really sure I have any of the answers. But I can tell you that for sure, when you're looking at the composition, if your eye is drawn somewhere, put more detail there. Alright, so I'm probably going to spend the rest of the time putting in small little details everywhere in the same manner that I've already described previously. So let's just sit back, relax, and enjoy the process, and let all these little details take us to a faraway place where all the snow is fluffy and welcoming. Alright, let's use a little bit more color in these shadows. I'm using cerulean and just a drop of ultramarine from our previous mix. I think this really does feel like it's snowy now. Now I'm dropping some cerulean and blue-gray mix together to just finish up these shadow areas and darken them up as dark as they need to go. And you can see I'm using a really light touch so as not to disturb the paint that's underneath. The blue just cools it down and really makes it feel a little bit icier. Now dipping into my blue-gray mix, let's create some final details in these mountain tops. I'm focusing mostly on the one that's a larger square because the smaller one feels more complete. But this one here lacks detail, especially balance at the bottom of the composition. So I want to create that detail at the bottom. I'm also working in some of these small areas at the transition where the mountain transitions from light to dark, because that is an area that will draw the eye, and so it is a very, very detailed high contrast spot. Now, it's really easy to overdo a painting, and this is something I've been guilty of as well. So I'm really trying to be careful here and not do too much more. I want to give a little bit more contrast to the side of that mountain in the distance. But if we overdo the detail too much, we risk really making it feel overworked. So just a little bit here and there, defining edges, doing some final last things. And I think though I might be getting into too much overworking, so let's smooth that out and soften it. Oh my goodness. There we go. Alright, I think that's a sign to call it a day. So here we have the tape peel and reveal, and I have captured the sound for this so that hopefully our ASMR friends might enjoy it. Alright, well that's it. I hope that you enjoyed this little piece. I'm going to put a little signature, my initials plus the year, at the very corner with the Staedtler pigment liner in 0.05 black. You can sign in any manner. A lot of artists will put it right underneath the tape line in pencil. This is your preference. Alright, so now we're going to jump into all of the other bits that went into making this little piece. And so let's go right into palette swatching and how I prep my palette. I love these mister bottles. I spray my palette constantly to keep it wet. I find that the wetter the pigment, the easier it is to load my brush and get everything all wet and going. So let's start out with cerulean blue. This is one of my favorite colors, and so I just love playing with it. And I love swatching my palette before I begin, even if I'm very familiar with the colors, just because it's like a meditation. You just sit and play. And now I'm grabbing the permanent yellow light. This is the second color in my palette, and just putting the color on the paper. There's something so soothing about it. And now let's jump into quinacridone rose. This is one of my favorite colors for red. It's amazing the amount of mixes I can produce from this one red in my palette. And now moving to burnt umber. I love burnt umber for so many reasons, but the main reason is that it allows me to mix a black easily and painlessly with the next color that I'm about to show you, which is ultramarine blue. So if you notice, this palette, even though very simple, is extremely deliberate in my color choices. It's because it's based on science, and I can create almost any color in the rainbow with these 5 plus white colors. I add white gouache to my mix because sometimes I just want to add final white highlights at the end of the piece, and I don't consider it cheating. I consider it just having fun and playing with paint. But you don't have to include white gouache if you don't want to. You can see here I'm going back. Okay, so to display the opacity of the gouache, I love to put a pen mark down first and then put the white gouache over it to show exactly how transparent or opaque it is possible to get. So here I'm going to go a very, very opaque spot and a gradient going from a light wash to a very opaque blob. Alright, so here's my favorite 6-color palette. If you're interested in learning more about my color theory and the choices, then let me know in the comments below. So now let's create a neutral or two. For this, I am going to use this little dish. I love pre-mixing my neutrals, and I'll probably save this for another painting. So for this mix, let's get our paint really wet again. And I'm digging into my ultramarine. You will see that this will take me a long time to develop a huge dish of watercolor. But what's great is the time that I'm spending now means that I won't have to interrupt my painting process and mix a new neutral. This means that my mixtures will feel more consistent and harmonious, and also I feel like I get into a flow much easier. I get into a mixing flow when I'm mixing, where I'm just dabbing and blobbing and mixing and dabbing. And when I'm painting, I get into a painting flow where I'm analyzing and trying to put down the right shapes in the right spots. So it's a different kind of flow and a different kind of process. So this is my main reason for pre-mixing my neutrals. You do not have to do this. There are several alternatives to my neutral that I've mixed here. You can use a black, like ivory black or Mars black. One is cooler and one is warmer. You can also use Payne's Gray, which is a really beautiful dark bluey gray neutral color. So if you don't feel like going to all this trouble to mixing your own color, I don't blame you, and it's no big deal, and that is also not cheating. So you can use whatever colors you like. I'm just showing you exactly how I've created this piece so you can recreate it if you'd like to. Alright, so I've already jumped into Burnt Umber while I was chatting away with you about the palette. And what's great here is I'm using this little dish and it is slightly lopsided, and I've just learned which area the paint tends to drip down to. And if I use the corners like this, I can kind of judge an approximate equal balance between the two paints. Now you'll see one is a little stronger and will overpower the other, but it's quite a great way of mixing a lot of color and having it ready and at hand whenever you need that neutral. Oh my gosh, they're about to touch. It's the most exciting part, guys. Alright, let's get some more paint. Oh, they touched while I was getting paint. Oh, that's so fun. Alright. It's the little joys in life that really make painting so much fun. So let's mix these guys together and see what we have here. Alright. It looks more brown than blue, so let's add some more blue. Again. Alright, let's see how this is turning out. And sometimes it gets so dark, which is great, but it gets so dark that you need a scrap just to see what color it comes out as. So that is a pretty true neutral with just a tinge of brown, so I'm going to call that a brown gray. Very nice. I love it. I think I'm just going to leave it like that. So this will be my brown gray, my main neutral that I'm going to stem all of my other neutrals out of. Let's just add a little touch of more blue to that and then jump on over to our palette. Now this is a little porcelain palette and I love using this. And what we're going to use is a little bit more ultramarine and create a blue-gray mix. And looking at the photo that I'm about to paint, it really is clear that most of the color in this piece is blue. However, there's a lot of grays and neutrals, so I want to pre-mix these neutrals ahead. Well, now that looks just about right, actually. And I've got quite a lot in this little dish, so I think that should set us up pretty well. So now the next bit in this little bonus features at the end of this video, I would like to show you how I taped off the paper. It's pretty straightforward and basic. I have here 1-inch Scotch blue painter's tape. You can use any kind of tape you like at any width that you like. This is just stuff that I had laying around from a different project. And what I'd like to do is tape off first the edges and then create two separate compositions. You can see I'm not really super worried about measuring or keeping everything perfect. However, I'm trying to keep things at least at right angles so it looks good to the eye. So I'm lining up the edge of the tape with the edge of the paper. Very simple way to go about it. So after I create this border, what I want to do is decide where I want to divide the composition. You can put it evenly in the middle of the page. You could also put it to one side or the other. Because this piece is really playing with shapes and building shapes, I like to create two different shaped compositions to really demonstrate the wide variety of different ways that you can interpret the same exact photograph. Alright, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you've reached this far, then please give it a like. That would be awesome. And if you want to see more videos just like this in the future, then go ahead and subscribe and support my brand new watercolor channel. And thank you so much. I love painting with you and I really enjoyed this one. Until next time, take care.